Tonight, deadly airstrikes. Israel's latest moves stoking concerns of reigniting full-scale war. Even as a Trump-aligned conservative think tank proposes winding down Israeli military aid.
And thawing relations. President Trump and Putin discussing a possible end to the war in Ukraine and normalizing relations between the U.S. and Russia.
Plus, 80 years after World War II,
everything was bombed out on both sides of our building, our apartment house, but ours was still standing.
A family's 5-year journey retells the story of the Great War through the eyes of a survivor.
All this and more tonight on Faith Nation.
Gaza in flames and diplomacy in tatters as Israel resumes its war against Hamas. Welcome to Faith Nation. I'm John Jessup.
And good evening in Washington. I'm Jenna Browder. Israel says it is pounding Hamas targets across the Gaza Strip tonight, hitting command centers, weapon sites, and top military leaders.
The surprise attack shatters weeks of quiet and comes after the collapse of a ceasefire and hostage deal. The Hamas-run health ministry claims more than 400 people have been killed since this morning, but did not distinguish between militants and civilians in their death toll. Both sides are blaming each other for the truce's collapse. Israel and Washington accuse Hamas of rejecting proposals to extend the January ceasefire, while Hamas says Israel broke the agreement. In an interview with CBN today, Israel's ambassador to the United Nations, Danny Danone, warned Hamas to free the hostages or face the full force of the IDF.
We're watching them. We know what they are doing. Now they are hiding in the tunnels, and they have to realize if they want to get out of the tunnels, they will have to allow the hostages to get out. We have 59 hostages still in captivity. We assume that half of them are still alive, and we know that the physical situation is worsening. So we hope that they will get the message.
As the fighting intensifies, so does the human cost on both sides. Many Palestinians who had already been displaced by the fighting say they're losing hope for peace. Meanwhile, in Jerusalem, relatives of Israeli hostages are urging the government to return to negotiations, fearing the fate of their loved ones. But Israel insists the military campaign is far from over.
Well, as the U.S. and Israel continue to take on Hamas and other Iranian proxies in the region, national security experts at the Heritage Foundation say a new strategic landscape is taking shape.
That's right. They believe now is the time to reorient the U.S. relationship with Israel to an equal strategic partnership. CBN national security correspondent Caitlin Burke joins us now with what that could mean. Caitlin, how is what they're describing different from the relationship we currently have?
John, Jenna, the U.S. and Israel currently have what's considered a special relationship, first established by President Ronald Reagan in the 80s. Every 10 years, the U.S. commits to a new Memorandum of Understanding, or MOU, which lays out how much security assistance will be provided to Israel for its defense. The current MOU expires in 2028, and the experts at Heritage recommend using the opportunity to forge a new relationship.
We just celebrated the 75th anniversary of Israel, and we've had a relationship since the beginning, and we're instrumental in the founding of the state. Heritage wanted to chart a course for the next 25 years to get to the first 100-year anniversary.
In a new report, Heritage lays out a blueprint for expanding ties with Israel, taking the relationship from one of dependence to the kind of strategic partnership we have with only our closest allies.
Steps should be taken by Israel and the United States to ensure that Israel is autonomous and independent and not dependent on the United States for critical munitions.
As a part of the Heritage strategy, by 2048, foreign military financing would be replaced with foreign military sales. Former Israeli ambassador to the United States, Michael Oren, has been pushing for this kind of transition for years, calling Israel's reliance on U.S. weapons a sort of Achilles heel.
I was the only member of the Israeli government to vote against the Obama package of 2016-2017, precisely for this reason. I thought that if we ever get into a war, someone's going to say to us, well, you're doing things that we don't like, and we're going to hold up ammunition. And that's just what Obama did during the 2014 battle between Israel and Hamas. And that had a big impact on me, I must say. And I thought, oh, if we're ever in a bigger war, this could become a much bigger problem. And in fact, it was.
Oren pointing to the pause of weapons by the Biden administration during Israel's current war on Hamas over concerns about IDF operations in Gaza. The former ambassador voiced support for the new heritage strategy, which advises the Trump administration to use the next memorandum of understanding to begin advancing Israel's independence.
If in a Trump MOU, a large segment of that money would not be just for the acquisition of arms, but for building these cooperation programs, for investing in joint research institutions, staffs, that type of investment, I think, would be a very good use of that money.
Robert Greenway, the director of the Allison Center for National Security at the Heritage Foundation, says Washington should also continue to grow security and commercial ties between the Jewish state and its Arab neighbors.
If we can work with Israel to expand the Abraham Accords and reduce the threat from Iran, surrogates, and proxies, we could reduce the commitment on the Israeli side and the United States side for common defense. But we recognize that this is an aspiration, but it's something that we have to work together to accomplish. And we're putting a time horizon out there toward the 100th anniversary. So we're covering 25 years.
It points to how Israel used to rely on U.S. economic assistance until a plan was put in place for that to end so Israel could flourish on its own. Now their economy is one of the highest performing in the Middle East. He expects the same to be true for defense. John, Jenna?
All right, CBN News national security correspondent Caitlin Burke. Thank you, Caitlin. Now to a key diplomatic moment on the world stage. President Trump's high-stakes phone call today with Russia's Vladimir Putin. It's the first time they've spoken since Ukraine agreed to a 30-day ceasefire.
Yeah, the White House is calling this a critical moment in the war. CBN senior White House correspondent Kelly Wright joins us now with more details. Kelly, how did the conversation go today between the two leaders?
Well, Jenna, good evening to you. The White House says this is a movement towards peace, and the president wants a full ceasefire, but President Putin so far has not agreed to it yet. Now, they have agreed on a partial ceasefire, and here's what the White House has stated in a readout of today's meeting. President Trump and President Putin spoke about the need for peace and a ceasefire in the Ukraine war. But both leaders agree that this is only something that must end with peace and not conflict. It has to be a lasting peace. And they also stress the need for improved bilateral relations between the United States and Russia. The blood and treasure both men agree to, that's shared by Ukraine and Russia, have been spending in this war would be better spent on the needs of their people. So that's something that they're talking about as well. The readout goes on to say, John, that there's so much more that's at stake.
Kelly, along those lines, any idea on the conditions being negotiated to reach a ceasefire and gain a peace based on today's conversations?
Yeah, that's one of the points that's really being examined right now. The leaders, John, agree that the movement to peace will begin with an energy and infrastructure ceasefire, as well as technical negotiations on the implementation of maritime ceasefire in the Black Sea, important for both countries. Full ceasefire and then permanent peace. Now, these negotiations will begin immediately in the Middle East, and the leaders also spoke, according to this White House readout, that they will begin to work together to even stop the implementation of weapons, and that Israel should never have the ability to attack Israel. John?
Kelly, on immigration, the Trump administration is facing a legal showdown with a judge who issued a temporary order for the administration to halt the deportation of alleged Venezuelan gang members. What's the latest on that?
Yeah, that's right. The Trump administration is fighting back, Jenna. It is seeking to impeach District Judge Boasberg, who issued that temporary order over the weekend on Saturday, as the administration was already transporting gang members of Tren de Aragua to El Salvador for detention. National Security Advisor Mike Waltz and White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt explained that Tren de Aragua has been deemed and declared a terrorist, a foreign terrorist organization, and that they are no different from ISIS.
These are heinous monsters, rapists, murderers, kidnappers, sexual assaulters, predators who have no right to be in this country, and they must be held accountable.
And the president also weighing in on this issue. He posted on Truth Social earlier today why he was taking decisive action against Tren de Aragua. The president going on to Truth Social stating that I'm just doing what the voters wanted me to do. This judge, like many of the crooked judges I am forced to appear before, should be impeached. We don't want vicious, violent, and demented criminals, many of them deranged murderers in our country, make America great again. That's what the president is stating. And to that response, he received a response from Supreme Court Justice John Roberts, which is very rare. And while the Chief Justice did not name the president, he basically stated this: for more than 2 centuries, it has been established that impeachment is not an appropriate response to disagreement concerning a judicial decision. The normal appellate review process exists for that purpose. The Chief Justice sending a message to the White House today. John and Jenna.
All right, CBN White House correspondent Kelly Wright. Thank you so much, Kelly. Coming up, markets on edge and concerns about the economy. What a big decision from the Federal Reserve this week will mean for you and your wallet.
Welcome back. The Federal Reserve meets this week as questions grow about where the economy is headed. Inflation improved last month, but is still above the Fed's target of 2%. At the same time, retail sales came in weaker than expected, and some major chains say shoppers are starting to pull back. Executives from Dollar General to Walmart say customers are feeling stretched, and there are concerns tariffs could drive prices even higher. For now, the Fed's expected to hold rates steady as uncertainty continues to build. Mark Hamrick joins us now. He is Washington Bureau Chief and Senior Economic Analyst for Bankrate.com. Mark, welcome. So if the Fed isn't cutting rates yet, what would it take for them to make that move later this year? Could a recession force their hand?
Good to be with you, Jenna and John. Absolutely. If the economy were believed to be either entering a downturn or in a downturn, that would be a strong argument in favor of the Fed reducing its benchmark rate, which is now in the low 4% range, and it's come down from the 5% range. The Fed still regards its current level with that benchmark rate to be restrictive, essentially putting its foot on the brake of the economy. And the main reason for that is what you said in your remarks just a moment ago, and that is inflation remains unacceptably high. Part of the trap that the Federal Reserve might find itself in here is that we could really suffer from so-called stagflation, where economic growth comes to a halt, but we're still dealing with prices that are on the rise, and that is sort of the marriage of two inelegant outcomes, if indeed that were to materialize.
Mark, moving now to the stock market, where we saw a 10% drop last week. People are talking about this being a correction. How do we know whether it's a correction or a signal of economic troubles ahead?
Only in the rearview mirror eventually, John. So we can't know what the future path of the stock market is exactly, other than to say that we know over time stocks go up and down. Obviously, a very simple concept there. But let's reflect on what the market's done over the past couple of years. Even if we weren't dealing with all of the things that we're talking about here, the market was overdue for a pullback, and so the conditions that are present make that argument even more convincing. So 20% plus gains in both of the previous 2 years set the market up for, let's say, underperformance in 2025 and possibly in some of the years to come. And if we do encounter some more negative consequences than had been expected, then that bottom for the market might be a little lower than what we had seen otherwise. What I would say is most people are investing in the market for retirement. They need to play the long game, and so they need to think about the fact that we go through bull markets, bear markets, expansions, and recessions over the long term.
Well, in the short term, consumer sentiment has fallen sharply. Is that a sign of concern given what we just talked about earlier with stagflation and increasing prices?
Yes, indeed, John. That combined with business confidence measures that are showing some pressures as well. We need businesses and consumers to spend, and if they are uncertain about the future, if they're concerned about the present and the future, that means that spending will not be at levels to support the economy. These are worrying signs.
Yeah. Mark, what's your outlook for the next, say, few months, 6 months?
I think the main thing we can count on right now is uncertainty and volatility, both with the economy and in financial markets. And I think that in many ways, we should take President Trump at his word in the sense of he's obviously playing the tariffs card very strongly, and the outlook for that means potential challenges for economic growth, not only in the United States, but around the world, and a one-time adjustment in prices. And that's even if we don't get into a war in the sense of a trade war. We could be talking about a number of steps with respect to that. It'll be something we'll need to watch.
All right, Mark Hammer with a bank rate. It's always good to see you this Tuesday. Mark, thank you so much. Have a great evening.
Always a pleasure. Thank you.
And up next, from surviving Nazi Germany to escaping communist rule, one woman's childhood story is inspiring readers around the world. That's next, coming up on Faith Nation.
Welcome back. This year marks 80 years since the end of World War II, and a new book is bringing one survivor's story to life.
It's called A Child in Berlin, and it shares the powerful story of a young girl during the fall of Nazi Germany. I had the chance to speak with her. She's now 88 years old, and hear how she survived those final days of the war, alone in a bombed-out apartment.
So I thought we'd just do a little family history, and then I got into it and felt like this is a really important story and it needs to be a book.
Meet Rhonda Laritzin and Heidi Posnin. Together, they penned A Child in Berlin, the poignant story of Heidi Posnin and her mother during the fall of Germany.
And we spent 5 years collecting Heidi's oral history and letting her tell the story in bits and getting to know one another.
We talked over Zoom, they coming to me from rural Utah. That's where Heidi's story ends. It begins, though, in 1939 rural Germany, near the Polish border. Heidi was just 3 years old, living with her beloved grandmother.
I remember more of my grandmother's because I stayed with my grandmother first, and I remember the old country and the snow and the, going over to the neighbors, and those were good times.
Her mother, Kata, was a rising opera star in Berlin.
Well, that wasn't very much. It's just that she sang a lot and she practiced a lot.
Dating a Nazi officer, Kata found herself at a dinner party hosted by the Führer himself.
When Heidi told me that, we were pretty well into it. Like what? Your mother met Adolf Hitler? And of course, at the time, she was young and, Berlin was such an exciting place and she was in the middle of everything. But then she started to see what was happening.
Some 80 years later, the memories remain clear for Heidi.
I'll remember when the trucks would come down the street and I looked out the window and they were hauling people down out of the houses and putting them in the trucks. And I was asking my mother, I said, where are they all going? What's going on? My mom said, oh, they're just taking them to the workhouses. And so that's the end of it. She wouldn't tell me anything more.
Refusing to join the Nazi Communist Party, Kata felt she had no choice but to step down from the opera, rolling up her sleeves to work in a factory, and as so many did to survive, trading in the black market.
Well, those were usually dried beans, dried lentil, anything that you could store in sacks. We just pushed them underneath the bed. And then we made them into little small packages and we traded them with other people that had other things.
And that, like so many things, was risky.
When I was little, my mom would always drill me and say, now, if anybody asks you your name, what do you say? And I said, I'm going to say Heidi. She says, no, you say, I don't know.
Rhonda explains how as the war dragged on, Berlin became a city of mostly women and children. And as the war turned, it became a bombed-out hellscape, making life treacherous for anyone trying to survive.
Without giving away too much of the book, Heidi finds herself alone in the final weeks of the war, living in a bombed-out apartment building. She was just 9 years old.
But I came home after a bombing one time. Everything was bombed out on both sides of our building, our apartment house. But ours was still standing, a little bit crooked, but it was still standing. And so I went up the stairs and the doors were off the hinges and windows were all out, and that great big oven that we had that was all caved in, and all the glass was in my mom's bed.
Heidi eventually married an American soldier and found her way to the United States, where she made a life for herself in Ogden, Utah. Now living in Huntsville, Utah, she tends to all of her animals like she did so many years ago with her grandmother.
I was going to sit on it, drag it, flag. The German words keep coming in.
After surviving Nazi Germany and escaping the communist sector of East Berlin, Heidi describes herself as a freedom-loving patriot.
Every time I listen to the national anthem at a ball game or something, I still get choked up and, brings sometimes tears to my eyes that I'm so lucky that I'm here now.
Through it all, she's not jaded, her warm glow radiating through the screen. She says there's a saying she chooses to live by.
I always say, eat life, don't let life eat you.
And the book, again, is called A Child in Berlin. You can get it anywhere books are sold. And John, I have to say, it's a riveting book. I gave it to my mom. I've given it to some friends. It's a wonderful read.
Well, she really seemed to give and tell this emotional story that you often don't hear when you hear about survivors of World War II.
Yeah, the Jews obviously suffered the most, or anyone who was in the camps, but life was really hard for people in places like Berlin where they didn't have food, they didn't have, the homes were bombed out. Life was really, really hard. I mean, they were eating pets,
wow.
Many of them, to get by. It was treacherous.
Great report.
Thanks
for sharing. Coming up, a first for the Los Angeles Marathon since 1994, next on Faith Nation.
Download the CBN News app. One place for all of your news. Breaking news alerts. Watch CBN News Channel live. CBN News, because truth matters. Get the CBN News app today.
Finally tonight, a marathon victory for America and Los Angeles wildfire victims.
For the first time in more than 30 years, an American won first place in the Los Angeles Marathon. Matt Rickman of Illinois crossed the finish line with a time of 2 hours, 7 minutes, and 58 seconds. I think Jenna can beat that. Thousands of runners attended the 40th anniversary of the race, including runners from all 50 states, more than 70 countries, along with several firefighters who helped to extinguish January's wildfires. A group of nonprofits teamed up to create merchandise in support of Together LA. All the proceeds go to the relief efforts for those affected by the Los Angeles County wildfires, and I'd say that's a pretty great cause for the area.
Yeah, that's amazing. It's so nice to see for that area. And John, can you imagine 26 miles in 2 hours?
Nope.
That's crazy. That is so fast.
Thanks for watching.
All right, have a great night. I really can't.